Yep. You like it?
All right, I call the House to order. Welcome to the open grand final round of Borneo ABP 2014. Congratulations to all persons in this far. In opening government, we have VP Maratu. In opening opposition, we have 10P4. In closing government, we have VP Mara 1. And in closing opposition, we have IBP 2. Just in general housekeeping rules, please turn off all your electronic devices or put them on silent mode. Please do not exit the rooms while speakers are holding the floor. Keep your discussions to a minimum, if possible, none at all. And my name is Bobby. I'll be the chair for this grand final round. To my left is Cindy Francisca. To my right is Alan Cabrera, Zane Bo, Jim Andrew, Dan Porter, and Seth Templeton. Under the motion that this House will compel religions to remove the concept of the afterlife from the religious doctrines, I'd like to welcome the Prime Minister to open the debate.
Yeah.
Yes. The afterlife is a perpetual concept. If you're good, you get to see the Heavenly Father at the gates of heaven. If you're bad, you get to see the infidels in hell. And Sino-African government believes that the perennial core of this idea stems upon the fact that the afterlife is so intertwined with the idea of miracle and the idea of fear. And we think that it shifts the focus to how in which individuals can necessarily subscribe to that religion or to how other individuals perceive that religion, Mr. Speaker. That is what the debate. What is this debate about? This debate is about what avenue or the way in which we forward religion to particular individuals in society. This debate is not an attack to religion in any manner whatsoever. The stance from opposition to open government is very simple. That we think that it creates a better subscription or a better form of belief to individuals within society and a better form of reception to all other individuals within society. Mr. Speaker, what are we okay with? One, we understand that religion is extremely subjective, that it allows for individuals to reconcile many different principles with their moral compass. However, we think that God as a concept is something that we're okay with. Why? Because we think that God as a concept is something that provides salvation or catharsis to individuals. But we think that without the subsidiary attachment, no thankfully, of fear or miracle, that people are still able to believe the concept of religion and God. And we think that it's very important for man to realize that, no thank you, that moral principles of a particular individual that subscribe to a religion has to be independent to any consequential external factors, and we think that's very important. But why is this good, Mr. Speaker? Because we think that the way in which religion coerces particular individual is so strengthened upon the idea of fear and the idea of miracle. And it creates undue influence as well as coercion to our individuals to necessarily react in terms of making actions, Mr. Speaker. And it limits the ability for an individual to necessarily subscribe to the idea of religion in the way in which they want to conceptualize that religion. For example, a Muslim who necessarily is pro-rights and wants to believe that homosexuals deserve the same kind of rights to every other individual in society is limited because religion tells you that if you believe in something, no thank you, because the religion tells you that if you believe in something like this, or if you support your gay friends, you will be condemned to hell as well, because by extension, you're committing a sin. That's the difference. But firstly, what is this concept of afterlife? No thank you. No thank you. Most religions are often centered, most religions are centered upon the afterlife. And this is the thrust that you use in terms of galvanizing supporters or trying to get individuals to subscribe to a particular religion. Only if you subscribe to my religion, and only if you subscribe to the values that I could espouse to you, then you can get access to this amazing afterlife. Or if you don't know, thank you, if you don't subscribe to this particular religion, you will be condemned to hell. And we think that that's bad because there are many different forms of afterlife that exist within society right now. Either you can be reincarnation as Oprah maybe, or things like achieving nirvana within a particular religion, or even getting to the 7 levels of heaven with the beautiful angels waiting for you, or the 7 levels of hell where people like say the convener is waiting for you, right? The way in which people adopt a religion needs to be independent of the way in which there is a consequential belief. Because we think that if individuals can subscribe to a particular religion and believing in that religion as it is, that it provides for a better conceptualization of that religion. Before I move on, sure.
How in your world do you envision God providing salvation to people if not for the afterlife?
We think that God can still show, we think that religion already does this independent of the afterlife, right? For example, God tells you that if you do something good, that as an individual, you are a good person. We don't think that you need to express the idea of an afterlife and tell a person that if you don't pick up trash or if you don't treat a person nicely, that you will be sent to hell. Those two things can be independent from each other. Firstly, let's look at the idea of how we reconceptualize the idea of salvation. We think that individuals in the society need to be able to find peace with the concept of religion as it is. That we don't think, or we don't support the idea that religion should be consequential, especially since those consequences may or may not crystallize to individuals within society. And we think that this creates a harm, because the way in which individuals participate or subscribe to religion is always dependent upon the consequences that you get in a later life. And we think that this removes any form of ability for an individual to necessarily reconcile particular forms of religion that they may or may not necessarily like. And this creates many harms. Firstly, it creates a coercion, right? Because of the extreme fear of brutal and perpetual consequence. Because religion is because the afterlife is such an abstract concept. But the fact in which the religion can tell you that if you go to hell, you have to drink boiling water filled with like things that you don't want to drink on a daily basis. These are things that coerces individuals into taking actions that we might not necessarily be able to reconcile with. But the idea that if you're not part of any subscription or a religion, that you have sinned, then you are trapped in a perpetual cycle of torture. And we think that individuals need to be able to exercise agency in terms of how they reconcile their moral beliefs and how they reconcile their treatment to individuals who subscribe into particular individuals. We don't think that we want religion to come forward as being malicious in terms of apostate not being able to ever enter or not being able to ever get a good within society. We don't accept that. Secondly, we also think that it creates relentless devotions in terms of people not being able to reconcile or question particular forms of avenues within the religion. Individuals who starve to death in the name of God, individuals who commit jihadism in the idea of God, no thank you, because they believe that afterlife will absorb all of their sins. That all of the sins that they committed in the eyes of society will be a benefit that God can create because the afterlife will protect these individuals. We think that the kind of relentless devotion that you can remove and create a society that believes in the moral values of the religion as it is, without really considering the consequences to that action. In hopes for some form of reward, Mr. Speaker, we need to create lines to how individuals present themselves in society or how they act. But lastly, it creates immediate compliance to individuals. We think that the way in which that individuals cannot question the fact that their afterlife exists, the fact that some form of nirvana exists, the fact that the avenue is limited to only individuals who subscribe, Mr. Speaker, especially since the concept of the afterlife is extremely easy to manipulate. That Jesus may provide you salvation at the day of God. Or even that Islam uses fear by saying that if you are a kafir or a person who don't believe in a religion, you will not be able to enter the gates of heaven. We don't think that this is fair, and it creates a compliance individual who will not be able to reconcile the choices that they have in life. If you don't comply, you are considered a bad person, and we don't want to have this idea within society. We want religion to exist for the moral good that it provides, not because of the consequential benefits that may or may not crystallize. Side Open Government is proud to open this debate.
Thank the Prime Minister for this speech. To the piece of the opposition, we'd like to welcome the leader of all.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not a religious person, and it's probably because I've never needed to be a religious person. I've had a good education, I've had a family who's loved me, I've had a life which has left me content. But we think not everyone has that kind of life. And we think the hopes of an afterlife is probably the only motivation for these individuals who continue to do moral actions in the face of suffering, Mr. Speaker. Because it's extremely important to have this conception of an afterlife or heaven or hell that opening government does not want. I'm going to prove three things in opening opposition. Firstly, why the belief in afterlife is critical in guiding people to moral actions which may not be in their current tangible incentives themselves. Secondly, I'm talking about why it's an inspiration for individuals who have nothing or who the world has failed. And thirdly, what creates unnecessary tension between the religion and the state, but that has other real consequences, which is bad. Rebuttals will be integrated. First point, why is the belief in religion in afterlife is critical to guiding moral actions for individuals? Because for most societies around the world, religion is the driving force for doing good. The morality of the society, both in terms of laws as well as morals between individuals, are driven by religion. Often this good, or the good that religion prescribes, isn't always in your best interest, but may have great social value, especially for individuals who have the ability to do good, who have excess of resources and have no incentive to give it to other individuals. Because people are inherently selfish and only see what is good for them, Mr. Speaker. We think many religions use the concept of the afterlife to try to align the incentives of individuals who have resources to those who don't. The fact that the mitigation of birth lottery only happens in instances in which individuals feel that their future lives may be compromised if they don't do their best to try to give what they have to individuals who to people who don't have. Even if the afterlife does not exist, at least in the life that does exist, people want more equality for these individuals and push people to do good. But the fact that there's an uncertainty related to what your life might look like often compels you to do good, even if you've done a lot before, right? The fact that you don't know how much it takes to actually get into heaven or want to increase the conception of your life, for example, we think you're pushed to do good. There are arguing for us, and this is really quite stupid. The fact that it makes the support for rights for homosexuals harder, and these minorities, for example, are disadvantaged. Firstly, I have to respond to this. Firstly, the belief in God or what God says is good still continues to exist under their paradigm. You will still continue to oppress homosexuals by using that as an excuse. But second, there's constant evolution regarding the ideas that you do have. There can be debate about things like the ideas or the things that you do that might lead to hell, but that's not an argument proving the consequence in and of itself. Because there are other parts which may lead to heaven, for example. For example, the Anglican Church, for example, has accepted the first openly gay bishop, for example. Or imams in most Muslim countries have rejected ISIS as a form of Muslim Islam that they do not represent. Right? Those are debates that you can continue to have regarding the things that lead to heaven or hell. That does not require you to remove heaven and hell as a concept in and of itself, but there are other good things which heaven and hell do promote. Before I go on closing.
Sir, there are other things that can promote altruism within an individual, the need to help others, the sympathy we feel for others' pain. But isn't religion used disproportionately to perpetrate harm among society?
Sure. It's for some individuals, empathy and sympathy may be a driving force. We don't think that's true for all individuals. We think something that compels you to align your incentives. The incentive of someone who's so detached from you can only happen in the instance where both your end goals are joined together and your incentives align with those incentives as well. The conclusion of the first argument is that we compel individuals who have the ability to do good, as well as prevent individuals who often commit immoral actions when the state cannot catch them. For example, you might do something that's, if you know is fundamentally wrong, the state may not, for example, catch you or send you to jail. We prevent individuals from committing these moral actions in private or in instances where we can't catch them. That's a benefit. But second, it's a source of inspiration for individuals who have nothing in their lives. Point is that many individuals find themselves on the wrong side of the birth lottery. They have either no resources or born into abject poverty or failing their endeavors in life. Not everyone reaches the levels that we have reached of the individuals in this room. These are often the people who fall back on the belief of being rewarded for their actions in the afterlife to either continue to doing good or not fall back on immoral actions, or for example, fall into crime and affect the lives of other individuals. Or the fact that these individuals at least continue to live their lives with some degree of utility, or some degree of hopes and aspirations, that they know that there is someone who's looking after them and will reward them for the things that they have done, irrespective of the material benefits that they could accrue in their lives. That's a psychological and massive psychological benefit, especially for individuals who have no material benefits to fall back on. But it's also good for grieving individuals, right? The fact that people often get over the losses in their lives by at least hoping that there is some reunification in the future. The fact that these individuals often, when a massive chunk of their lives is taken away and separated from them, can only continue to live their lives because of the hope of that reunification. We think that's good. The afterlife is a great motivation for people who either lost all, or for example, people who are grieving over the loss of other individuals. Are there anything else?
Why can't people feel these things independent of the fact that religion is telling you that these are things that are entrenched, things that are perpetual, and if your actions don't correlate, you don't get either of these things?
Yeah, but we think that's good, right? The fear of something, for example, the fear of a perpetual or continuous hell for doing bad actions is a good thing. If your argument is that there are certain actions which are inherently good, which might lead you to hell, those things can be changed to debate and discourse, which is already happening. As long as the good things can be promoted through that, we don't see why that's a problem. But thirdly, we think this is an unnecessary source of tension between religion and state. Often religion doctrines are the most important parts of this religion. Millions and billions of people around the world predicate their lives on being able to match up their actions with things which are given in these doctrines. There's going to be massive political pressure for opposition to this move in the first place. But more importantly, we've already faced massive opposition in doing things like the separation of the church and the state. Even though the majority of individuals in the world are religious, we obtain that by using the excuse that your actions sometimes influence other individuals who don't opt into these religions, and hence the church and the state should be separated. But what do you do now? The state forces this on that conception of what religion ought to be on people who've opted into this religion. They no longer use the excuse that is that for other individuals. The state says, well, we should be able to define what the conception of religion means to you, irrespective of whether it hurts other individuals or not. That's why this is going to face this disproportionate amount of political pressure and opposition. This move is going to be seen as one where the state is trying to force that conception, or your life should be on individuals. We think firstly it's unfair the state does this, because we don't think we should be able to force individuals on defining their conceptions of their life and things that they think are going to happen in their life in the first place. But secondly, it has tangibly bad outcomes, right? The fact that you often lose massive political capital with religious groups, which you can use in other instances, for example, in giving rights to other people, or for example, passing marriage laws in other countries. You face disproportionate opposition now. You change something which hasn't really proved any benefit to compromise on future benefits which will accrue to individuals. But secondly, you antagonize conservatism, Mr. Speaker. That's terrible, because more religious individuals are now going to push for more pro-religious policies and force a narrative that the state is out to get you. That means more people are likely to vote on things like religion, or more people are likely to be influenced by their parish, for example, their priest in their neighborhood church regarding the vote that they do, Mr. Speaker. Then that's inherently bad for all individuals, if you there are certain individuals who want to be excluded from the impact of religion in society. Because we think this move is unnecessary, because we think the conception of heaven and hell is important in driving moral actions, and because there's unnecessary tension created between the religion and the state. I'm very happy with it.
Thank you, your opposition, for the speech, and I would like to work on the Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Hello?
Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you introduce the concept of heaven and hell, or afterlife, or the fact that everything you do right now has the consequences that's perpetual, that alone has a huge impact on the decision making or the mental calculus of every single individual. And that impact is huge and we think extremely coercive. Before that, a few rebuttals, right? The gist of Aditya's speech was that the afterlife creates hope and inspiration and creates an incentive for people to do moral good. So this is how I'll react to that. I'll tell you how that we'd like to reconceptualize the idea of salvation, something you didn't react to in Jay's speech. That one, God is always around you, and that is salvation alone. And second, that you do good because you genuinely believe that it is a moral good and you want to do it. If you do it separate of whether or not there's a concept of afterlife, then you will do it because of the fact that you believe that it's good. But the differentiation between their incentive is this. Because the concept that we must understand is that whether a person believes in afterlife or not, or whether a person is religious, they have the ability to do something good or to do something extremely bad. The way they justify it is always in line with the way they feel their religion proposed them to justify it. Like, for example, extremist Christians endorse violence against homosexuals for correctional purposes. So they have the ability to justify that it is something good at the end of the day. But if you are a person who genuinely believes in the principles of Christianity and genuinely believe in the principles that violence is never an option, then you are someone that will never endorse that sort of violence towards any person, regardless of what the book says or regardless of what you think God says. So that is the differentiation between someone who does something for the incentive of going towards a better afterlife and someone who genuinely believes in religion or the principles of religion. And we think we better achieve that under our side. No, thank you. So let's approach these two other things that they talked about, right? Two things that weren't very mutually exclusive. One, it's not fair that the state does this and the state is impeding on the rights of religious institutions. One, this debate generally runs under the assumption that state always impede on the right of religious communities anyway. What we must establish, and the burden of fact opening government, is to show how there is a huge harm in the concept of afterlife. Therefore, there is a necessary need for us to impede on the right of the religious community, and that it wouldn't antagonize the religious community. They also said that discourse and discussion can happen. But under our side, we are going to prove to you how discourse and the idea of reasonable conceptualization of religion doesn't happen or is hindered by the idea of perpetual consequences. Then we win the argument of how discussion and discourse can happen better. No, thank you. On to positive contribution. What will we achieve under our side? For practical and tangible consequences, we think at the very least, number one, we have less ability for religious or leaders preachers to immediately attract people or believers to immediate subscription. Like, for example, most Islamic preachers like to start their preachers to non-believers by saying, I'm offering you a gateway to heaven. If you don't follow me, you're walking towards the path of hell. This creates an immediate belief in Islam or skipping the reasonable idea of learning about the religion first. That means that instead of you believing that because you want to respect the dignity of your body or the dignity of yourself as a person, that you believe in that religion because the concept of afterlife exists, therefore you believe in that concept. We think that a lot of people will not create a lot of genuine believers, but instead immediate believers who skip the process of reasonable calculation before entering a religion. So we think that it creates a lot of, for example, people who immediately believe in religion who are unreasonable. We have a lot of extreme cults created as well, like the idea of mass suicide to travel to heaven together, and all those other extreme cults. Those are ideas that are easily believed because they can introduce a coercive idea such as the afterlife. And we think this is a loophole that we give religious preachers and other people like that. No, thank you, sir. In a moment. So what we also create under our side are more moderate and reasonable believers. So, for example, people who opt into like Abrahamic religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you can opt into the certain concepts, like the concept of respecting each other, brotherhood, and all those concepts, while at the same time being able to opt out of certain other concepts without the fear of being condemned to hell or without any other form of unreasonable fear. So we create people who actually internalize their own religion and understand every aspect of their religion, as opposed to immediately believing those religions. So we create a lot of moderate believers. So what this creates is also better discourse on the parts of many different religions and interfaith discussion. Because that can happen now because of without immediate antagonization of different religions with each other. Go ahead, sir.
So you can't have both. You can't say that the fear of God still exists under your paradigm to compel people to do good, but people just simply opt out because there's no mechanism to stop them anymore.
What we aim to create an open government isn't people who faithfully and blindly believe in every single concept of religion, rather people who reasonably think about whether or not they want to enter this religion or whether or not they want to subscribe to certain moral principles, right? So we believe that under our side, good people will be good anyway because they will genuinely believe in the principles that those moral values tell them to do. Bad people will be bad anyway because they'll always find a way to justify themselves to escape the idea of hell through religious reasons and things like that. So what is the burden on side opening government? Our burden is simple. Our burden was just to prove to you that the idea and the concept of afterlife is something so destructive towards every single one of us. The impact of introducing that idea is coercive. And the fact that a preacher can come up here and tell you that if you don't follow me, you're condemned to perpetual suffering is a concept that's coercive. It creates less reasonable believers, more people who are relentlessly devoted to a religion that they might or might not understand. We're okay with people who are devoted, but we want them to understand their own religion without the immediate introduction of fear. And we think immediate introduction of fear is extremely obvious from the idea of afterlife we propose.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for the speech. To conclude the opening half of the debate, we'd like to welcome the Deputy Leader of All.
It is highly contradictory on government to say that religion is a good thing, God is a good thing, all of the other aspects of religion work, but somehow the one thing that ties religion and God to the people doesn't. We don't think that makes sense because salvation from God amongst religious people is tied to the concept of the afterlife and happens solely through the concept of the afterlife. It is impossible for them to say on government that you do good because God is watching you, but God really has no reward or punishment mechanism even if he did. We don't think that actually solves anything or compels people to do good if God actually has no consequence on you. We're going to do three things in this speech. One, we're going to look at the concept of building morality and which side is likely to do more good for people. Two, we're going to look at people who want to opt out of the religion or the likelihood of distortion of information. And three, we're going to look at the consequence of side government's policy, which they tried to run away from. Because this is a practical debate, guys. The motion says compel. It has the word preach and discuss in it. You actually need to talk about consequences of this policy. Let's look at the first concept. The idea from them, and especially from POI from closing, was this idea of you can build morality from other things like empathy and sympathy in science. For the atheistic individual, sure, you can do that. You can build your morality based on other things. But for religious people who believe in the concept of God and who believe in the concept of religion and its ideologies, the concept of morality is built on the doctrine of being accountable to a higher being, of being accountable to someone and to someone who then decides your fate based on your actions. You cannot say that these people should continue to believe in God, that religion is legitimate, but that they shouldn't preach, discuss, or publish about the consequences of those doctrines or the consequences of that God. It's difficult for you to tell them, well, just empathize because there is reason to do good because you empathize with another human being, when they are detached from the lives of other people in society, and their concept of empathy is built on a common understanding of humanity and a common understanding of what God expects of humanity in general. You cannot then connect it with the afterlife. The next thing then is this idea of people distort everything and things go wrong. That's not mutually exclusive from both sides, guys. On your side, people will still distort all of the principles and teachings and ideologies of religion and the concept of God in general, which means all of the harms of the lack of equality, the lack of equal rights, and all of those things will still happen because people can distort everything. The next thing then is this concept of discussion. We think that discussion of ideals and the concept of being able to change ideologies happens on our side too, right? We gave the examples of this in Mitzvah, where people can disassociate themselves from principles like anti-equality, where Islam disassociates itself from ISIS. We think that that kind of discourse and discussion of what the consequences are and which levels of morality are a good thing for society, right? Because you then get to have consequences for what's happening. It was very strange for Jay to come out here at the start and say coercion due to brutal consequence is extremely abstract, but being a good person is somehow less abstract for an individual in deciding what they should do in life. That makes absolutely no sense. The last thing that in Jasmine was people opt into religion without knowing if they believe in it or not because of heaven and hell. One, unlikely. Because if you really came from, say, a non-religious background and grew up in an atheistic lifestyle, someone telling you you may go to heaven in the future isn't going to likely tell you you should believe in Christianity. That doesn't really work for an individual who has believed in science or believed in the lack of religion for a while growing up. But even if that was the case, even if people converted into religion because of the consequences that are going to be levied upon them, on opposition, we're happy to say that's a good thing, because that shapes individuals' morality to commit the right actions and do the right things in society. And if they morally become better people because of the belief in consequence of heaven and hell, that's legitimately a benefit we're happy to take on side opposition. Before we go on, closing.
Many religions use the attraction of prescribing best practices in life or a full functioning prescription of a way of life rather than appealing to the afterlife, and that gives people spiritual fulfillment. Why can't all religions work around current forms of afterlife and just go for spiritual fulfillment?
Because the discussion of the best practices of life are dependent on the consequences for not following those best practices of life. But even if it was the case, you cannot argue that some religions have a process that allows an afterlife to not be included. Therefore, let's ban all religions that do have a process that involves the afterlife. We think that's extremely unfair to suggest one process is better than the other. The only tangible harm that came out outside government is people are deciding on religion because of fear. So, we never really heard why that was a bad thing or why the state needed to come in and make decisions based on it. We think that because there was a lack of actual tangible harm on individuals from this policy, the consequence is the individuals are going to perceive the state intervention in religion for perceivably no reason whatsoever. This encroachment onto your core fundamental part of your identity and a core fundamental part of your community for no reason whatsoever is exactly the kind of thing that regresses political discourse that they wanted in opening government. If they wanted to have people to be more empathetic, if they wanted to have people to have more discourse, and they wanted individuals to be more involved in deciding what is good for equality and all these other things, what you needed to do wasn't to anger your religious population, wasn't to tell them everything you believe in is absolutely wrong, drop it now and don't discuss it ever. It is to actually engage in those consequences and tell them why people who don't believe in them or people who even still believe in them should also get some benefits out of it. Why are reactions of the people important to consider at all in this debate? We think that the reactions of the people on the ground when this policy is put in place determines what happens to discourse, determines what happens to morality of the state. And we think that the state has a responsibility to take actions based on what is a likely outcome out of it. We don't think that policy outside government actually achieves anything. Because one, we don't think it's very enforceable because parents are still going to teach their children these things, these things will go underground. But two, we think the increased involvement by religious groups to now collectivize or politicize because of this means the greater inspiration to engage in religious politics, to engage in a lot of other consequences that detract or regress from the very end goals that opening government wanted. In our world, we allow for these individuals to have this discourse within the barriers or parameters that they decide for themselves, rather than arbitrary state involvement in their barriers or parameters of their conceptions of life. We're very proud to be opening opposition.
Thank you, Leader Bob. So, for the closing half of the debate, we'd like to welcome the member of God.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, coming from a team whose members are probably already condemned to the deepest, darkest echelons of hell, we are, along with our beloved organizers, JCI, we are happy here to defend the merits of the state intervening to limit the harms that religion may propose. Let me be very clear about two things before I move on in my speech. Firstly, it is not the burden of the government team to defend the merits of religion or the continuing relevance of religion in our current day and age. We are happy for religion to be viewed as an objective lifestyle rather than necessarily a belief system that people should opt in or opt out of. We're even happy if religion eventually becomes unpopular and dies off in our society. But secondly as well, we also think it's important, and this is especially relevant to the opening opposition, it is important to view religion and the way in which religion is perceived and used as it is in reality, rather than the utopia that opening opposition proposed, where everyone is using religion for purposes of charity, where everyone is using religion in terms of spreading love and happiness for mankind. We will prove to you why that's untrue and largely false. So the discussion in the opening half of today's debate, explaining how we will enter this debate, yes, I took your tip, Dan. The opening half discussed what's the difference between harmful religious beliefs and the concept of the afterlife. We'll deal with that, as well as how our opening also talked about how this limits the choices and makes people more radical. We'll bring to you two unique forms of analysis. Firstly, how, although we agree that some backlash will happen, how we will create intergenerational moderation, and why in the future people will be more likely to moderate and to acquiesce to our new version of religion. Secondly, how using the afterlife as a motivation for people to do good things limits the encouragement for people to do good things. Firstly, why is the afterlife such a harmful concept? Now, we can see that with this policy, there are still innately harmful concepts of religion, like how women are discriminated in terms of how much property they get, or in terms of communal leadership, or in terms of roles in family, and how homosexuals are still discriminated. That's fine. But why is the afterlife such a bad thing? Because it uses the tactic of fear-mongering in order to make you do these bad things. So religion has lots of bad options, but the afterlife and the fear of hell and the repercussions that you may get from God encourages you. It's the fuel to the fire. It forces you to cross the Rubicon and finally act out all these forms of discrimination in society. Look at how hell is used to force children into adhering to religious concepts. Children are taught about how hot the fires of hell are, how many lashes you get for consuming a drop of alcohol. It severely limits the ability of individuals to make proper choices. I cannot necessarily act out the way I do because religion tells me if I don't that God will do this. That's fine, that came from opening. Yes, Jay, it did. But here's what opening opposition told you. Hang on, it promotes altruism. It promotes you to do good things. Three responses. Firstly, it assumes that individuals cannot formulate natural altruistic behaviors or cannot make altruistic behaviors based on rational decisions. So I might want to donate to poor people because I understand economic concept that poor people or having lots of poor people is a bad thing for my country's society and its economy. Or I may simply feel sympathy when I see an animal in pain, or because of the natural love I feel for my friends and my family, I can sympathize with other people who are suffering, and I would not want that suffering to be done to me. But these things can also make me want to donate to charity, can also make me want to give shelter to individuals who have none. You must tell me why religion overwhelms all these, or why these other forms of rational decision making can't happen. Second response. They also assume that followers and preachers will utilize these positive attitudes of religion and ignore all the rest. They were largely unresponsive to all the harms that we brought to you and how religion is disproportionately used for harms. Lastly, and this is where our new analysis comes in, when you use religion to encourage people to do good things, that rhetoric is severely limited to the extent that you can interpret religion and what God wants you to do or what doesn't want you to do in order to make you do good things. Look at Martin Luther King. He was the son of a preacher, and when he first fought for the civil rights movement, he used the argument that if you don't allow black people to have equal rights, that you will be condemned in hell because black people are humans too. When he used that rhetoric, the civil rights movement got nowhere. It was until the extent that Martin Luther King stopped using that rhetoric and used the rhetoric that African Americans are humans too, and they should be treated equally as humans. So arguments of humanity and egalitarianism are a lot more powerful than using religious rhetoric up to interpretation. Because whenever you use religion as interpretation, someone else out there is going to interpret religion in another way and counter the exact same attitudes of altruism that you wanted. Before I move on, yes, please.
Sympathy and empathy are not uniform. Not everyone can be as sympathetic as you are. You think it's better to have an objective end goal to nudge social values of all individuals, irrespective of the level of empathy they might have?
Yes, because like I just said, when you use religion or when you use the fear of hell or the rewards of heaven as a means to forward your cause, your rhetoric or your ability to forward that cause is severely limited. Because religion can be interpreted in different ways, because you can always find different reasons to say, no, actually God meant this, no, actually Jesus meant that. But when you use regular, objective, calculated arguments or rhetoric, that is a lot better. When you say that we should care for others because they're humans, when you say that we should love each other and care for the poor because it will be bad if we do not, that's a lot more effective. Lastly, how does our model make things better? Open opposition told you that we're going to radicalize the conservatives, it's going to be harder to negotiate with religious groups, it's going to be they're going to be less likely to moderate. Right, all the generic stuff. 3 responses. Firstly, radicalization is always going to exist. No matter how much we try to change religion or try to interpret and counter religion, there's always going to be a group of people that are always going to want to do bad things. But this is where we come in. We think we're going to create intergenerational moderation. So yeah, maybe when we take these bits of text out of the Bible or out of the Quran, there's going to be backlash in society. But when the children of these followers, when the newer generation comes in and reads religion as an objective lifestyle, as a lifestyle that allows you the choice to make what you want, the ability to opt in and opt out of that lifestyle as you deem fit, that is going to be a lot more attractive than you forcing it down their throats. Look at, and the example we have here is how we forced schools to teach evolution in the United Kingdom and in the Southern States, for example. When we did this, there was a lot of antagonism, there was a lot of backlash. But when children grew up learning about evolution, explaining the universe as it is, and as they see it, it allowed them more choices, it allowed them more perspectives on the universe, and that essentially caused them to moderate in time. We think that is more likely to happen under our proposal. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate is about trade-offs. Yes, we understand religion has some benefits. We've proven to you that religion is disproportionately more harmful and perpetrated for those uses. We also told you that yes, backlash might happen, but at the end of the day, people will be more attracted to religion because it gives you more choices and because it allows you to be the person you want to be. For those reasons, go with closing government.
Thank the member of government for this speech, and I would like to welcome the member of the opposition.
This is the problem when you take a few things for granted and never ask the question of whether everything that the proposition says is true. So what will the closing opposition do? Firstly, we'll tell you whether fear can ever be an objective matrix. Whether it's fear is in this world is as objective, is more objective than fear in the afterworld. We say fear at all times, no matter what the propensity, is always subjective and vague. So the objectivity that you try to protect will remain as long as any amount of fear, whether it become afterlife or this life, remains. So as long as the concept of God exists or any form of here-like fear exists, fear is similar in all perspectives. But we'll also tell you why. Can religion ever exist without afterlife? And what is the biggest pillar of religion, and how can you never, ever create the intergenerational moderation by absolutely rejecting any form of basis of religion? But before I do so, let's understand what is fear. Ladies and gentlemen, we say when you've never experienced something, that fear used as a deterrent is always subjective. For example, if you are a 15-year-old boy who has never gone to prison, the concept of prison is abstract to you, which means that fear is as abstract to you as some random guy with horn coming to beat you up with some fire stick. So we say fear is always subjective, especially when you've never faced it. Will you ever really face these kind of fears if you're deterred from an action because of these fears? We say no. So then why not send everybody to prison to figure out how the prison looks like, right? We never do that because fear is always used as a tool by every form of body, never said by opening opposition. Let's understand what new Wikipedia is closing opposition, right? Let's understand this. Opening opposition never told us why fear is an illegitimate tool to use in religion. Or it is absolutely illegitimate when disproportionate punishments in Malaysia are there for carrying drugs, right? That absolute fear that you cannot do this no matter what. We say if that fear can be used, another body such as religion, which is again, it should remain independent of the state, should be allowed to use this fear because it's always subjective. More importantly, they tell us consequentialism makes religion more abstract. We tell you, without consequences, religion is worse off. Why? Because of the fact that people relate to something where it can feel a consequence. However, what is the abstract that they give you? They tell you God is around you and looks at you. However, one, God is worse. It is more abstract than the concept of hell. Why? Because the hell is described, again, never given to you by opening opposition. What is the concept of hell? The hell tells you the fire is 9 times more hot than the fire that you face right now. One, that is, I understand, somewhat subjective. However, when no doctrine remains within the religion that tells you what God is or what God does to you when you do a certain thing, the nature of abstractness increases. Then they tell us people can always self-regulate, right? Here's when we have a problem. We say sympathy is not something that's inborn, that is always shaped by society from the very beginning, right? Whether the sympathy is shaped by your mother, the state, or some neutral atheist person, we say the sympathy is always shaped from the very beginning. If I was never told to not hit my brother, I would have always hit my brother. So we say that sympathy, the concept of morality, is always shaped within. You need to tell me why religion cannot use this tool to increase sympathy in these circumstances, whereas state can use these tools to increase the same sympathy. No. But then the funniest when Rafiq has only 1 minute of extension, when he talks about how children will need to read religion more objectively. We say that people who want to read religion more objectively will do so despite knowing the concept of afterlife. Why is this? Do you think I'm an idiot who's standing here wearing a hijab without not knowing what the consequences are, or just because of the fear that some of the guy with the horn will poke me in the ass, right? Why are we doing this, right? We're doing this because any individual who wants to gain more knowledge will always gain more knowledge no matter what. An individual who is instigated by fear is like an idiot who will always be instigated by fear, no matter how big the fear or small the fear. So we say even if fear is your problem, for that individual, a fear of this life is similar to the fear of afterlife. No, say. Then they come and tell us propagation of extremist values are done through afterlife and this concept. We say that the propagation of extremist values, yes, we somewhat agree to that. But what we also say is because of the existence of afterlife concept is the reason why counter narratives can ever come up. Why is this? When we talk about Martin King Luther, he can use the exact same concept on the opposite side, chose Islam as a religion, and decided to talk about afterlife and tell them why submitting blacks into slavery is the wrong thing. So we say if you can use that as a narrative for something wrong, we can always use that as a narrative, counter narrative for something bad. So more importantly, yes,
it's true that fear will exist, but fear on this side is so much more destructive because the destructiveness of fear especially can be used for absolute and blind devotion. Individuals cannot opt out. Apostates cannot opt out of Islam because they tell you that hell is bad. Again, we say that this is a fallacious characterization.
every individual has their set of fear and assumption. We say any moderate individual might be afraid of a certain commodity more than another moderate individual. It's up to how you relate that certain afterlife, right? And we say if you allow that relation to exist, is how you survive. Now, what more will the closing opposition give to you despite so much of the characterization? We say that a huge chunk of this debate lies on whether you can really move afterlife from religion. Rafi comes and says, we don't care if religion becomes obsolete. That is how you attack a certain religion. We say attack against any religion, whether it's rational or irrational, cannot be provoked. But more importantly, what is this so direct attack on religion? We say religion bases its fundament on afterlife, which means as soon as you remove that fundament, what do? You make sure that God no longer exists. You make sure people no longer have the right to preach that God exists. Which means you invalidate the preachers of that religion and the concept of that religion. Which means it's no longer about questioning, it becomes about ridiculing when the state outright denies the right of a religion to preach afterlife. What is this? This is something that dictators do all the livelong day. They build their own mosques, call themselves God, and compel you to believe in something. We say you do not have the right to take away the legitimacy of that religion, legitimacy of that preacher, of that religion, believing in that religion. You do not have the right to not allow a counter narrative to exist. Tell me why these are all not true. Thank you.
Member of the opposition for the speech. To conclude the case of the government bench, we'd like to welcome the government bench.
Ladies and gentlemen, the debate here isn't about finding out whether or not religion can be used for good or can be used for bad. Because closing government agrees that either side may be able to use religion for good or bad. What we fundamentally disagree with is that your ability to use religion for good or bad depends on your first exposure to religion. It depends on whether or not your preacher is someone that preaches to you the reunification and all the good values that opening officer talked about, or whether the first mover that decides your conceptualization of religion is one of radicalism on this side of the house. So fundamentally, ladies and gentlemen, this debate isn't about whether it can be good or can be bad. It's about the extent and the malleability of religion, the malleability of the concept of hell and heaven, and how easily manipulated people are according to circumstance, ladies and gentlemen. And that is why closing government begs to propose in this debate. We feel that the closing opposition in this debate, ladies and gentlemen, have been fundamentally dismissive to the argumentation that came up from closing opposition. Sure, we agree to you that here, like for example, you may not be able to illustrate to the fullest extent what prison is to a 6-year-old child. But guess what? It can be very easily defeated if you tell people that the boogeyman lives in a state county prison. You can see prison data. You can talk to ex-prisoners. You can, for God's sake, Google for all you want images of what a prison looks like. It can be very easy to defeat. But when are you going to raise Hitler up from the dead and ask him what does the seventh circle of hell look like, ladies and gentlemen? You leave it up to parents who tell their 6-year-old child that being in hell means that you'll be gargling the spit of individuals that are burning at the cross, ladies and gentlemen. That 6-year-olds have to reconceptualize and let their imaginations run wild, that they'll be pointed at the stake and stabbed multiple times. That was what I was taught as I was growing up, ladies and gentlemen. That was my conception of what hell was. And that's what many people go through, the psychological torture that they very easily dismiss under that side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. That's only reinforced by the fact that every time you go to church, you have a community reinforcing that rhetoric every single Sunday to you, ladies and gentlemen. That's the fundamental difference between the fear that you have in regards to prison, school, the boogeyman, and hell, ladies and gentlemen. If you're talking about sympathy, we already told you that you have many other instances where you can instill sympathy. I'll talk to that a little bit more later on. But at this point in the debate, we can fundamentally all agree that hell is many times worse, or at least the conception of hell is many times worse when you let kids imagine it rather than just telling them that prison is where you go to, ladies and gentlemen. What else did closing government tell you in Rafiq's speech? Ladies and gentlemen, intergenerational moderation is not is the central issue of this debate, because it doesn't matter so much that we can have individuals stop saying certain things or keep saying certain things, but it only matters so far as what does the next generation think, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we told you that teaching evolution in schools have been fundamentally effective in ensuring that there is a disconnect between individuals or communities that want to instill certain religious values in their kids, as well as what their kids believe in the future and what they carry on. Ladies and gentlemen, you can't run away from school, and at the very least, if you regulate churches, they can't run away from that either, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why it was very pertinent that they responded to the argumentation coming from this side of the house. And the red herring response that came up from closing opposition is that now we're creating our own state and we're becoming the god of our own state, and we're imposing religion on individuals. I'll deal with that a lot later on, but just fundamentally, ladies and gentlemen, we're not changing what it means to be a Muslim. We're not changing what it means to be a Christian. You still believe in Allah. You still eat halal food. You still fundamentally believe, if you're Catholic, in the Trinity of the Church, ladies and gentlemen. It's just that you don't believe in heaven and hell. Heaven and hell. That's what we believe. We believe that a lot of the extension that came up from closing government was unresponded to. In my speech, I will answer to you several questions. Firstly, is whether the psychological harm is tantamount to the state having a standing in regulating this behavior. Because we think closing government brought you that there is an objective standard of which the state can intervene and ensure that you are able to say certain things. But secondly, if we can prove to you that religions have an alternative in terms of providing people spiritual fulfillment without having the conception of heaven and hell, then opposition in this debate does not win prima facie. I'll take opening.
So Rafiq's argument was that you can always push rational arguments for people to do good. That assumes that there are always objective benefits to you for helping others, which might almost always not be the case.
Ladies and gentlemen, we already conceded from start closing government that maybe some individuals that are able to find some objective benefit won't be able to get that benefit, and we're fine with that. The difference here is, can you fill that gap of what's existing and what reconceptualization of religion can occur in this instance? And we think you can. Firstly, can we regulate religion under this instance? We've already told you many times over in closing government that the extent of which we can impose ourselves on religion is already extended into not only tangible things, for example, you abusing individuals, but deep-seated things like psychological harm on this side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. For instance, the education of the Amish or Orthodox Jews or any Orthodox community is already heavily regulated by the government. But even if you look at normal interactions in society, for example, whether a parent can tell a child that he's fat and verbally abuse that child, ladies and gentlemen, we already regulate that behavior and say that that's something that's illegitimate at that instance. But secondly, if you're talking about poor individuals and how to inspire hope onto these individuals, we feel it's troubling that the poor's inspiration oftentimes relies on what's their first exposure to religion. Because many times over, the worst forms of religion heavily prey upon the poorest in society, heavily poor on the most vulnerable in society, because they are the ones that provide salvation in this instance. That's why your salvation is heavily malleable and only tangible insofar that the individual preaching to you is telling you that it's a good thing or a bad thing. In this instance, your benefit is not necessarily does not necessarily materialize. But in the instance where you're talking about the alternatives, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you very simply that we have many religions in status quo, whether it be Buddhism or Islam or Christianity, that preaches that your consequence, your whatever benefit that you derive, is the spiritual fulfillment that you feel from being the best person that you can be. For example, eating halal food may have the consequence of eating healthy, ladies and gentlemen. Being a Buddhist may mean that you become vegetarian. While all these things may not extend to you being in the afterlife, but these things are still alternatives, for example, for individuals to feel that they have hope, to feel that they have a future, and to feel that you must side with closing government. For all those reasons, I'm proud to stand in closing government and in this Asian violence. Thank you very much.
Thank the government for the speech. To conclude the case of the opposition as well as the grand final, we'd like to welcome the opposition.
Apologies once again for the glasses. Ladies and gentlemen, we look the first question of the House. So is fear and consequentialism in itself a bad thing? We look at places where government frequently uses fear and other consequences to deter you from doing certain things, right? And as society, we have actively opted into that system. I.e., there is some degree of legitimacy for fear and consequentialism to exist within a social paradigm when the outcomes are favorable. This automatically means, ladies and gentlemen, the entire premise of the government bench, which says that fear in itself is a bad thing, is not necessarily true. But what was the response to this? The response was, look, you can picture the fear instilled in you by the state, but you can't necessarily picture that. We tell you, and Vasudha told you again, that in cases where this fear is not necessarily perfectly conceptualizable by anyone in the first place, but moreover, ladies and gentlemen, this does not negate the fact that fear is a viable tool. So what was the response to that then? They told you that this fear is bad because it makes people take stupid choices. What sort of stupid choices are we talking about then? They told us about kids who buy into these things at a very early age. We told you that the negative factors that they talk about, for example, extremist perspectives, etc., they don't necessarily rely on the fear of afterlife in the first place. If a parent or if a jihadist wants to mold a certain child into a certain way, they often do things like giving food and other things anyway, right? But more importantly, what is the nature of this fear within these kids anyway? The moment you tell a child or even a normal person that you will go to hell for this or Allah will condemn you to the depths of hell, you're more likely to ask, why the fuck, right? The point is, people in general are more inquisitive than they give them credit for. The point is, whenever you use these consequences, etc., there is an imperative from within the person to actually ask more questions, actually find out what the basis of this thing being regulated is there. For instance, ladies and gentlemen, when you see that, for example, in Islam, certain things are forbidden, like having pork, like having alcohol, then people look at why should I opt into the system? It's not just for the fear, and then they find out it is because to deter other sorts of lifestyles that are not there in the first place, right? But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, before I begin,
Islamic feminist groups like the Sisters of Islam struggle to gain traction in conservative communities because there are always counter-interpretations as to what God means. If we remove the element of fear from religion, won't people be having more objective discussions about how we treat women?
Not necessarily. Why? When we look at these cases where these state-sanctioned or socially acceptable values conflict with those of religious values, you see that in a lot of these cases, you have to have some degree of acceptability from the conservatives in the first place. So when we look at the instance of Boston Mosque having some degree of homosexuality within that, we tell you that this was to some extent sparked some degree of discourse within the Muslim world overall. We say that there are movements going forward for homosexuality and for female equality. However, what do you do when you come under their model? Under their model, you reject the entire premise of the religion itself. I.e., you make it look like, you actively say that the entire premise of the religion itself, which is consequentialism, which is a state where God evaluates how you have lived your life, is invalid. I.e., there is no discourse in the first place because the premise of your engagement in itself is flawed within the system, right? So essentially, what was the second issue? The entire notion that people can self-regulate because they have sympathy and empathy within them. Number one, ladies and gentlemen, if that were true, you would not need to have a legal system to moderate behavior in the first place, right? So even despite the state actively preaching in every single school that this is how you should behave, people are still dicks
all the time. Why is this? Because even if moral values and some degree of code is absolutely fine to regulate the behavior for a large number of people, that's simply not true for each and every one because incentives vary. Second response to that is that sympathy and empathy are not generated within a vacuum, right? So if you have a child growing up in an absolutely barren piece of land, it's probably not going to have the same value that you have. I.e., religion in itself helps mold these positive values in the first place. So we don't really see how those things are exclusive or how you can rely on these things when these things values are absent, right? So now we come into the third issue of how do we then engage people. Under the entire side of the government house, you just let extremists and you just let the worst part of the society go by saying bad people will always be bad people. How did the closing opposition respond to this? We told you that bad people won't always be bad people. How do we look at it, right? So there are different bands of people within society for who different types of incentives work. So for example, if a person believes that this act is good in and on itself, he's likely to then do the act. However, then why do we take tax in the first place? Right? Why do we mandate tax? Because these sorts of incentives are not flat and they do not engage each and every one the same way. What do we mean by this? We mean that when you want to engage with a particular group of society, i.e. the group of society that you want to change or you want to come out of those sorts of activities that you don't really like, you need to engage on terms that they find palatable to within themselves, right? So when they tell us that creationism was taught as a concept because it was not a central concept of the way religion was preached. However, we're talking about something that is so internal or so absolutely intrinsic to the formation of all of these Abrahamic religions that simply no one will engage you on those terms. Then the response to this then was that look, those people were really bad, they will remain that way. We told you not really. Religion has had fixing positive impacts on these people in the first place. Then they tell us that the presence of alternatives in other religions means these have to take precedence as well. We told you no, so long as you can't really prove the specific damage to society for these alternative systems of care, we don't really think that argument stands. Moreover, they tell us that in a lot of these cases, poor people are then more vulnerable to these sorts of systems. We do not again agree because we look at extremists and we look at groups that have been disenfranchised by the state are more likely to preserve their values. The final issue was intergenerational modernization happens. How does intergenerational modernization happen in India? Overall, when the values that you are trying to remove get diluted, right? Essentially, they rely on having, once they remove these sorts of systems, people then forget about that. The problem with that is that these religions are entrenched, these values are so entrenched that the moment you try to actively compel religious groups from actually removing them, they go out of their way to preserve it in the long run. So we have seen these values, especially true in parts of conservative America, in parts of other conservative societies, where people go out of the way to actually preserve the specific values that you want to remove. I.e., the moment you see that fear on itself is not necessarily a bad thing, you have to then remove the negative values and negative aspects of religion. This can only be done by a positive engagement. The positive engagement does not come under their model. Thank you.
Opposition work, just to prepare the final round. This is part 4. She has an announcement will be made throughout the award ceremony.